What is up, my little deinos? Vepsis, your host of the Helsinki Hydreigons, and we are here for my BBR Season 3 announcement video when I'm gonna be introducing you a brand new draft league that I'm gonna be taking part of after taking over someone else's roster, which was formerly coached by Diet Tite and his team be the New Breeder Rockros. He was part of this league for 4 weeks deep with a 2-2 -2 differential, and we are gonna be heritating his former record and roster, which you can see in front of your roster in itself. And like I said, this is a Wi-Fi Galarian decks in DLC 2 metagame. And with those, we can actually now check, as you're gonna see right now in your screen, the tier list, how the mons were priced for the BBR Season 3. And if you're interested to check this more in depth, as you can see that mons are basically priced all the way, being the 200 being the highest price, all the way down to the 20-point category, and it still basically have 20-point difference as you jump lower and lower or higher and higher in their prices. And the mons that are highlighted in red are already taken by some other team, and the ones that are hovering basically on the white coloring, those are the ones that are still available for being picked at this point of the time as you're gonna be watching this video, or you're having the tier list open, because obviously that can always change depending on the time you're watching this video. But this video we're gonna be talking about the changes that I made, because I was given unlimited transactions to make changes on this roster, and I'm gonna be trying to capitalize on that and make my team as best as possible with the limitations as we have, because we have to have 11 mons as a whole, no more or no less, and our budget of using will be 1100 points in itself. So I have to keep within that category or with those limitations and try to figure out the best team of 11 for myself. So now let's jump into the showdown screen, where I'm gonna be basically talking about the 11 mons that I decide that I'm gonna be having for myself most likely throughout the entire rest of the regular season, and hopefully for a playoff run. And here we are with the showdown layout, where we are gonna be now talking about the changes, all the mons that I decide to keep from the original roster and why I did in sort of that. And I'm gonna be targeting this in order that we start from the highest price mon that I kept, and then gradually work ourselves lower and lower to the lowest point mons that I decide to keep or heritate from the free agency in itself. So we are gonna be starting on talking about the Mew that I decide to keep on the team, and I think this was pretty obvious that I was going to do this, because Mew is one of the best mons in a draft league format as of right now. Some leagues have been even banning this mon because it might be too much right now in a Galarian deck to deal with, and I can kind of see that point of view for sure. And when I was able to have access to Mew and I saw this roster when I was asking to take over, I knew immediately if I'm gonna be taking this team over, I'm gonna be trying to build as best as possible around this thing, so it doesn't have to be pigeonholed into a defensive or a supportive role as often as possible. Therefore, that I would have as many hazard setters as possible, as many hazard removers as possible, as much as defensive backbulk option as possible as well throughout the season. But obviously it's gonna be hard when I'm dealing with Galarian decks and 19 other coaches already picking their mons on their teams before I get access to even consider them myself. So it was still challenging to try to make that work as best as possible, but I feel like I did. But now talking about the Mew as itself, the biggest buffs that it got, as we know, is that it got access to both spikes and toxic spikes in this generation that it formerly did not get access to, and now it got access to one of the best setup moves in the game with Dragon Dance, and already had very good setup moves like Calm Mind, Bulk Up, Rock Polish, Agility, all those setup moves as well. But Dragon Dance is a whole different thing, because it's able to boost up its attack and speed at the same time, which is a very, very powerful setup move as we know. And when we just go over its move pool from the showdown layout, as you can see, and as we already knew, its move pool is so wide. There's so much stuff that I can pick from every single week that what do I possibly wanna run on you, and it's gonna be very difficult for my opponents and create a headache to try to even predict what kind of Mew I'm gonna be running, unless it's very obvious what I need it for. But I try to make my team that it's not obvious that what Mew would have to do every single week in itself. And considering my strengths that at least I believe I have in draft league format, playing for this for 5 years already, I think one of my biggest strengths throughout these years has been building teams and also forming a game plan how I want to approach that battle and how I'm gonna be executing it. And I think with those two strengths together, those are basically things that you want to have with mon like Mew. So I'm really excited to see that what can I do with it this season, because this is basically a perfect possible mon for me to have with those strengths to be included into it. So I'm really excited to see what we can do with this Mew, and hopefully you are as well, as we are jumping into this season in the BBR. And now, next mod that I decided to want to keep on this roster has been a mod that I wanted to retry now in Generation 8, where I haven't used it, or I have used it in previous generations, but not yet in this generation. And one of the biggest buffs is the item health heavy duty boots, as we know, so therefore it doesn't take stealth rock damage or any other hazard damage or be affected by sticky webs while it has the item intact. And one of the biggest additions that it got is triple axle, which is gonna be basically a 120 base power ice type move as long as you hit it 3 times with the 90% accuracy of each of those 3 hits, which is the same accuracy as Icicle Crash already as it was. But the big power difference is that this was usually its strongest stab in prior generations in Ice Stab, which is 85, but when you buff it into 120, that is a pretty big difference when it comes to power, what it's gonna be able to use. And when you already have a very strong Dark Stab in Knockout, which is one of the best moves in the game as it is, especially in this generation when there's no C moves and no Mega Evolution Stones to be used, so you're basically always getting rid of someone's item, so it's always gonna have that 90 base power move, which is pretty insane for a stab. And coming out of attacks that are 120, Viva is gonna be still one of the premier offensive revenge killers in Galarian metagame. It might be the 3rd best right now if you think about it, after Dragapult and Zeraora, for example. So me having this as my arsenal compared to all the 19 other teams, I had to take advantage of this and make sure that I build around Viva as best as possible. And I'm really excited to see what it can do this season for us as well. And now, jumping into the next mod that I actually now retain from the free agency that was somehow still available, was going to be a Rotom Heat. And Rotom Heat I've been using a lot, as you have been able to tell, in prior generation or in Generation 8 already as it is. This is my favorite Rotom form, and I believe it's the best Rotom form right now, but that's a whole nother subject which we are not going to be digging into in this video. But the biggest 2 reasons are going to be its typing and the resistance that it provides, and the matchups that this mon will be having throughout our rest of the regular season. This mon is gonna be one of the most important members potentially outside of our first 2 picks, what I've been able to tell from my schedule at the from preview as I was making these decisions. And when you look at the prices of the from the tiers in itself, and you look at the fire types, for example, what were available, this was a very fair price for Rotom Heat compared to some other fire types that were priced and what were available to me. So I think this was the best choice I could have done for its dual typing. I needed both of these typings considering my schedule, and it was just a very simple, comfortable pick for me to do that provide me default support that this team needs with Weavile and Mew in itself respectively. So next mod that I decided to retain from free agency, which to my surprise, like Rotom Heat, that somehow was available. I don't know why other teams have already jumping into this mon and had it in their own drafts. And that is going to be Nidoking with Poison and Ground typing, providing me 2 typings similar Rotom Heat to its Electric and Fire. These were typings that I always wanted to have on this team going to this season, considering what I go up against. And with that in mind, it also provided me the hazards, and it gives me a phenomenal wall breaker with its coverage. As we know about Nidos, they always had a phenomenal move pool, and Life Orb Shield Force gives them really strong power output, even their space attack stats might not be that impressive in first glance. But if you've been playing Draft League for a long time and you have to play against Nidos, or you'll be using their stuff yourself, you know by now how good these are in Draft League format. And this was just a very easy decision for me once I saw it being available, that alright, I'm definitely taking this mon on. Now it's more so about like how do I figure out the rest of the team. And speaking of that, let's move on to my 120 point mod that I decided to pick, which is going to be a Noivern, which this, besides Hydreigon, is or definitely are the 2 trackers that I've been picking the most throughout Generation 8, and it just happens to have the best ability in the game that mainly makes it so attractive to me, especially in a Wi-Fi scenario when we are dealing with the chest timer and you don't really want to take any time doing calcs or figuring out your opponent's items. It's so much easier and handy when you have a frisk ability and immediately tell that, okay, what's their item? Alright, it's that item, let's move on the battle in itself. And giving me momentum with U-turn is pretty big when I already have Volt Switch from Rotom and Mew having access to basically every momentum in the game, including actually Teleport, which we didn't talk about, which is also a big momentum move that I've grown to love a lot in this generation. So we have a good amount of momentum on this team, and this was another mod that I wanted to add for initial speed as well, because my team, if I wouldn't take Noivern on this point of all, this was actually a big headache to find another fast mod alongside with Viva that I was happy with from the free agency as well. It doesn't fit exactly a good speed tier gap, but it was at least a very fast mod that I know is reliable and fulfill a lot of different holes that I still wanted to fulfill, especially a hazard control, because I felt like I want to have as many as possible when I have Viva and Mew, like I said, with also already with Rotom Heat earlier. So that's gonna be the Noivern. Then we are talking about Celesteal that I decide to keep from the original roster, and that is due to the fact that if you look at yet again, if you have the tab open from the tier list of the BBR, the steel types also had a very vary of price differences, some which you would agree with and some which you would disagree with how they were priced as. And there weren't too many steel types from the mons that were left outside of Resisteel. I think the only ones that I was heavily considering were Magneson at 120, because I actually would like to try it one of these days, because I haven't tried it yet. And then there was Doublade at 60 points, which I think was a pretty fair price for a budget steel type. But it obviously wasn't as ideal because it's not especially bulky, even with Eviolite, and it doesn't have access to Stealth Rocks, which are pretty nice as well to have on your steel types, or your other mons that like Mew or Nidoking would not be pigeonholed to be your Stealth Rockers. So in the end, 100 point Resisteel, I would rather have it 80 points if you ask me, but as a 100 point, I think it was pretty fair. And it's gonna be able to do it so pretty well on this team, and it keeps me having some defensive backbone on this team that is not necessarily pigeonholed into that role, because Resisteel is all about that bulk, man. It doesn't want to do necessarily any kind of offensive sets other than air defense and body press, which is pretty cool a set in itself if you want to run air defense and body press with Resisteel, because it has such a high defense that if you start boosting it, body press starts to make it a pretty strong move to go for from coming out of a defensive mon. So it allows Resisteel to not to be as passive as it has been in prior generations, and it has access to both Thunder Wave and Toxic, so it has some shenanigans with status moves that it can go for to kind of make up for the lack of damage output that it's kind of lacking otherwise when you look at its attack stats. But that's pretty much the Resisteel. Then we are going to be talking about my water type, which is going to be Mantine from the 80 point category, and this was something that I took from the free agency, and this is similar to some other typings that like you want to have a water type in your trap one way or another, and ideally it would be a bulky one, and from this team I think bulky water type would have been always better for me to have, more so because that Mew doesn't have to do any kind of defensive role if the bulky water type will be good enough. So I decided that Mantine would be a pretty fair pick to have. I never used in Mantine in traffic format, and granted it's a little bit something that I'm not necessarily nervous of, but I'm intrigued to see how it's gonna play out in my hands, because literally I never used it before. But with heavy duty boots, it's obviously a little bit better, so it doesn't take Stealth Rock damage. It gives me another defocus that is really nice to have. It has a far more reliable recovery in Roost, and it has haste as well for any kind of setup sweepers that I would have to watch out for throughout the rest of the regular season. So I think, regards to the water types that were available to me to pick from, I think Mantine was one of the fair prices what you get out of it in a comparison, because there were some water types that I considered all the way for 120 category, but that would have limited my other options so much, which I didn't want to do because of that. And the lower point back category water types from Mantine, like below it, like 60 or 40 or 20 pointers, they would gotten a little bit dicier how good they would have been exactly in that role. So I'm pretty happy with Mantine, what it's going to be able to provide to us. And then we have Wigglytuff, which is going to be a fairy type that we decide to keep on this team, because just like steel types, just like water types, like these typical and very necessary typings that people always want to have in drafts. When I already have 19 other people already picking their ideal fairy type for their draft, I didn't have really too many options to pick from. Like, if I wanted to really go high and spend a lot of, there would have been Azumarill, I think 160 that was available, but I wasn't really feeling to make such a big investment to Azumarill on this draft. And then the other fairy types would have been Alcremie for 100 points. Didn't really feel like spending as much points for Alcremie. And then after that, it's basically, do I have a Wigglytuff, do I have a Togetic? Because both of them were basically available to me at 60-point category. But I decided that I'll keep Wigglytuff, because it also provides me a normal typing, so my other picks don't have to fulfill that role anymore for that in itself. And Togetic is pretty cool in itself, because it has access to Teleport, which gives him a slow Wish-Passer, which is pretty nice for the team if I need to. It gives me a Cleric outside of Mew, so Mew doesn't have to fulfill that kind of role if I need Heal Bear on that particular week. It gives me Stealth Rocks as well, and we already have, actually with Wigglytuff now good together, we already have 4 Stealth Rockers, which is pretty good for considering that we are dealing with 20 codes Wi-Fi Draft League in a Galarian deck. Like, not many people will have even 2 reliable Stealth Rockers, so us having 4 is pretty nice little strengths that we are gonna be having throughout this season with this draft. And obviously, like Noivern, Frisk ability is one of my, or is my favorite ability in Draft League metagame. And with, again, Wi-Fi scenarios, dealing with that chest timer as it is, having a Frisk ability is gonna be so valuable to me, because I can immediately just send this thing in, and if I don't know my opponent's item yet, I will know after this turn as it's gonna be activating. So I think Wigglytuff is gonna be really fun new fairy type for me to use, and I think it's gonna be something that we can at least bring in some weeks. I don't expect to be coming too often, but there are gonna be weeks that it will be handy for us throughout this season. And then we're gonna be talking about a experiment pick that I'm gonna be doing out of 40-point category, which is gonna be my grass type in Executor. But in fairness, where prior generations it's always been a non-factor for ever being drafted, in this generation I have a little hope that this thing can be somewhat usable for us, especially in my schedule. I think there are gonna be matchups that I can actually see myself bringing it and not do that bad of a job in itself, and allow me to do some other things with my other mons in itself, and allow it to be that little bossy defensive backbone on this team with Wish support, having a reliable recovery with Synthesis, and also like Wigglytuff, it has a slow teleport, so my little bulky mons that I have in the lower tiers, they aren't that passive, because they at least have that slow initiative for myself to get away from. And Harvest, with having 50% chance to restore your berry, whatever you'll be running, like a citrus berry, is not that bad of a thing either on it. So then you don't necessarily have to run Synthesis, and you can run actually some other moves like attacking moves, or any kind of other supporting moves that it gets access to, like dual screens or Stun Spore, Sleep Powder, or anything like that. So I think Executor, where in other senses will never be drafted, or it will never able to do anything in the games, I think in this generation it has more hope to do something, and I'm excited to see if it can do anything for us. But I do think with our schedule there will be opportunities for me to definitely consider of bringing it, and that's the most important thing about that. And then we have 2 20-pointers still to be picked to round out this draft. We are gonna be already running out of points at this point of time, even though I haven't been picking that many higher tier mons, but with the prices of each mon that they are having, and with only 1100 points to be spending for 11 mons, it's very easy to run out of points already midway through your draft. So there's gonna be some lower tier points that we have to also pick like the other teams, and for me it's gonna be 2 20-pointers, which are gonna be sharing one big thing that makes them at least some sort of a factor for matchups, and that is gonna be Magnet Bite with trapping ability called Magnet Pull, so it can trap steel types, and Arena Trap trappings, which you're a little bit more familiar with me picking this in NCP as my 1-pointer with that trapping ability. And I honestly, when I look at the 20-point categories, what mons were available, there were literally nothing that I saw that like, alright, you're actually decent at least 1 week. Like, there were literally nothing that were left that I was feeling like that about the other mons. So instead of trying to find anything that I would be like somewhat hopeful or more so pessimistic that they will pan out, I decided that I'm gonna be trying to utilize something that my friend always calls, like my good friend Martin calls, that trapping is broken in traffic, you should not be allowing it. He has been praising or saying this for a long time in our friend community, but lately at least I can see where he's coming from. Because imagine having a 20-pointer that can trap your higher tier monsters like trappings, like trapping, say, a steel type or electric type that I don't want to deal with an arena trap and kill them right that. Or something with first impression that they happen to be really weak to bug stab or bug covers in general. I can run a choice banded trappings with first impression and kill them right there and get rid of one of their opponent's higher tier monsters with my 20-pointer because they have this broken ability in arena trap. So having this kind of ability that either is gonna play in that way in a role in battles or force my opponent to run set cells instead of something actual useful item, I think this was basically the best that I could have gotten out of my 20 pointers, and that's basically gonna go same story with the Magnemite in itself. Like, there are gonna be some steel types that I saw on my schedule that this mod could potentially trap, or if I don't bring them in those matchups, there's a very good chance from my perspective that they might have to run set cell now because I have Magnemite. So one way or another, if these two even show up in battles, they will have their influence in the team building aspect, I would think. Or that's what I'm hoping basically out of my 20 pointers. I don't think I could have gotten anything better out of the 20 pointers, and that's basically the reason why they are here. So that is going to be the team in itself, and we're going to be actually kind of closing this out as I jump back to the website in itself, and you can actually see as a whole that all of the picks that I did, and we're going to be wrapping it out from there. And as we are here looking at from Automatic website, we can see my full roster now after the changes. So let me know in the comment section how you think I was able to do with the changes. Do you think it got better, and what things I could have done maybe better on this roster? But just keep in mind, like I try to do, as I'm critically still looking at this team, I'm not sure how well I did. The reality is going to be that it's going to be very hard to have a perfect team in these rules with these tiers and 20 people drafting the same pool and all those stuff combined. It was always going to be hard. It's never going to be as good as my other teams in other leagues throughout this generation, but I think it looks pretty fun. There are going to be some funky picks, as we're going to see in the lower part of it, that you haven't seen me using, but we have also some really good picks on the higher tier picks that I was able to get. And now we're gonna be able to see also some cool features from Automatic website, which are kind of providing us that little tools with hazard setters, momentum gainers that I was able to gain for myself, getting rid of items, what options I have, taunt users, hazard removals, all this cool stuff. If you want to dig down more on the Automatics website for the BBR, that link will be down below in the description, so make sure to check that out, and also all the courses in the BBR Season 3. But that will be all for me. Stay tuned for the next week's Saturday when we come back here for our debut for the BBR Season 3, and thank you for watching, and I'm gonna be seeing you guys later.